something special.
Television 9, your eyewitness news station.
We tabulated answers from some 8,200 voters that CBS News questioned as they left the polls today. As of the middle of the day, our figure showed something like this of those people we questioned. About 10% of the 8,200 were blacks, and we found that the black vote was going 4-1 for McGovern. The jobless voters in those same surveys were going 50 to 47 for McGovern. Not a very large margin there for McGovern, who had based a lot of his appeal on the underprivileged and the jobless in the country. But in most other categories, it certainly looks like a Nixon sweep. Among the whites, the old people, even the youth, they're not going heavily for McGovern. According to our survey, that was running only a couple of percentage points in favor of Senator McGovern. It was an area where he had hoped to win a very large indeed. Blue-collar voters, 16% of our sample, went 57 to 40 for the president. White-collar voters, 1/3 of our sample, lined up exactly 2-1 for the president. Mr. Nixon was winning the over 65 vote in our survey by more than 2-1. The Catholic vote so far stacking up 56% to 43% for Nixon, and that had always been a heavy Democratic area for the last 44 years at any rate. President Nixon is losing, however, the Jewish vote, according to our sample at the polling booths, among voters we sampled, and by a margin of almost 2-1. At one time early on in the campaign, it was thought that Senator McGovern was in trouble with the Jewish voters, but apparently they have come back to the Democratic Party in recent weeks. We now can add Maryland to President Nixon's list of states won, and that gives President Nixon 185 of the electoral votes needed toward the 270. Rather, that figure should be 212. Excuse me, I did not add Maryland in. With Maryland in, it's 212 votes now for President Nixon. He is not very far away from the 270 he needs for election to his second term. A man who won his first term with not even a majority of the votes, looks like he's going into his second term with a popular majority heavier than any man in American history, excepting only George Washington in the 2 terms he ran as our first president. In the Senate, however, there have been no changes as yet so far. The coattail effect of President Nixon doesn't seem to be that broad, that long. There have been 5 Republicans elected so far and 3 Democrats. It looks like the makeup of the Senate, if this trend continues across the country, will be about what it was before. The Republicans will not pick up the 5 votes they need to gain control of the Senate. Much the same is happening with some very scattered returns in the House so far. And now another one of those big states has fallen to President Nixon. It is Pennsylvania, and with a very high majority for President Nixon, 62 to 38 for the president. Pennsylvania. Those votes from Pennsylvania now go into the president's column. There are 27 of them. That'll give him 239 toward the 270 needed. He is only 31 votes away from re-election. CBS News coverage of Election Night 72 will continue in a moment.
Some girls always manage to look so put together, like this girl, who put it all together at JCPenney, all based on one very special pair of pants. In style, they're a classic, but they're made of the latest thing, woven, texturized polyester. The price, just $13. You could even afford to start all over with these extraordinary pants. This time, how about something in a nice houndstooth? At JCPenney, we know what you're looking for.
50 airline pilots, professionals, acutely sensitive to vibration, noise, and motion, compared this all-new 73 Mercury Marquis to a $31,000 European town car in an official test. 44 of the 50 judged Mercury more comfortable to drive.
I'm a very critical individual. I consider the Mercury better in every category.
It's just a more comfortable car to drive.
I think far and away the Mercury is the better car.
Mercury Marquis, built better, to ride better. At the sign of the cat.
The eighth of the once solid southern states has now gone for President Nixon. According to our CBS News estimate, Mississippi can be put in President Nixon's column. Strom Thurmond, who once ran as the presidential candidate on the states' rights ticket in 1948, which may have started the Republican landslide toward the Republicans of this year, has won his Senate race for re-election to a fourth term in South Carolina. And President Nixon has won Kansas, as expected, but with a very high majority, 69% to 31% for McGovern. That's the 18th state that President Nixon has won. His electoral vote is mounting very close to the 270 he needs for re-election. Let's go now to the east, and Mike Wallace.
Kent.
Mike, I called upon you.
Forgive me, Walter. Let's take a look at what has happened in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Connecticut in those presidential races, and we'll begin to understand the dimensions of the president's sweep in the Northeast, where, as I said a little bit earlier, his high point has been 27 electoral votes up to now. Just in those three states, he takes something over 42 electoral votes. Pennsylvania, first of all. You can see that only 2% of precincts are reporting, according to the tabulated vote, 45,000 to 24,000. But CBS News estimates that when all the votes are in Pennsylvania, the president will have won by a whopping 62% over McGovern's 38%, and his coattails are bound to make some difference in congressional races in that state. There is no senatorial or gubernatorial race there. Let's go to New Jersey. With 15% of the precincts reporting, 150,000 to 75,000 odd. But when all the votes are in, CBS News estimates that in New Jersey, 62% for Richard Nixon, 38% for George McGovern. And there are two congressional seats in particular, those of Congressman Helstosky and Congressman Howard, Democratic congressmen who are in serious trouble, obviously, in New Jersey. And finally, in Connecticut. Connecticut is bound to be one of the most democratic states in the nation. John Kennedy took it over Richard Nixon with 54% of the vote. Lyndon Johnson won it with 68% of the vote. Hubert Humphrey took 50% of the vote last time around, with George Wallace getting 6%. With 12% of the precincts reporting at 62,000 to 47,000, but CBS News estimates that when all the votes are in, it'll be a 60-40 win in Connecticut for President Nixon, and no one had suggested that it was going to be that big. Now let's take a look at how those votes are being put together. Let's start with Connecticut, where we just were. In high Democratic areas, the president is running 23 points ahead of his run against Hubert Humphrey. In moderate Democratic areas, he's running 25 points ahead of last time. In blue-collar areas, 26% ahead. In white-collar areas, 16%. Now, Connecticut is a ethnic state, labor state, blue-collar state, Catholic state. Mr. Nixon is obviously running well ahead of where he was 4 years ago in all of those, with all of those groups. The same thing is true with Pennsylvania. In moderately Democratic areas in Pennsylvania, he's running 25 points ahead of last time. High Democratic areas, 8 points ahead. Low income, 12 ahead. Mid-income, 14 ahead. Blue collar, 17 ahead. White collar, 10 points ahead. And of course, the same thing is true in New Jersey. He won New Jersey the last time around. Incidentally, in New Jersey, CBS News estimates that Clifford Case has been returned to the Senate, no surprise there, with something over 60% of the vote against Paul Krebs. Incidentally, on that one, Paul Krebs was at one time president of the CIO in New Jersey, and yet the state AFL-CIO endorsed Clifford Case this time around. There is only one place in the East up to now where the president's coattails perhaps are not working as well as they had been expected to. No, wait a moment. They are. In the gubernatorial race in West Virginia, CBS News now estimates that Governor Arch Moore will be returned to the State House, and Jay Rockefeller's bid to take that State House away from him evidently has gone down to defeat. The man they call the palace populist, some of them, he was called a carpetbagger by some other of his detractors. It was suggested that after only 4 years as Secretary of State there, and 2 years prior to that in the House, in the Assembly in West Virginia, perhaps the young Jay Rockefeller was taking on more of a contest than he ought to run for governor at the age of 35. He spent $1.5 million. The national press was down there looking at him. Arch Moore spent about $500,000. And as you see, when the votes are in, according to CBS News estimate, perhaps on the coattails of President Nixon, Arch Moore will be returned with 55% of the vote to Jay Rockefeller's 45% in West Virginia. Walter?
What will that do you think, to Jay Rockefeller's political future, Mike?
Well, he's building a house down there, which somebody said costs about $350,000. He has indicated, Mrs. Rockefeller, Sharon Percy, Chuck Percy's daughter, has indicated they intend to, I think she said, we're going to live and die in West Virginia. So obviously he's going to go out and try again.
That's one of the stories, of course, of any election year, is what happens to those young men who are coming up. Those who manage to buck a landslide and still win out, to defy the coattail effect, always will be looked at most favorably as the politicians look to the future of their party. In this case, it'll be the Democratic Party that'll be looking to those who defied the landslide. By the same token, those on the Republican side will have to show great pulling strength to keep up with the front of the ticket, President Nixon, in other words. And as Dan Rather pointed out to you earlier, this could have an effect in Illinois, where Senator Percy has high hopes for 1976, but didn't lead the ticket in Illinois. He ended up, it looks like, according to our CBS News estimate, will end up without quite the percentage that the president is taking Illinois. Dan, you've got a couple of calls in the Middle West, I think, on our VPA estimate. If you'd like to come in with them right now.
Well, indeed, Walter, Kansas, CBS News estimates, has gone for President Nixon, and we have results in several other races in Kansas, so let's take a look at it all the way through. First, the votes that are actually in and tabulated in the state of Kansas. Not that many of them in at the moment. Our CBS News boards with 2% of the precincts reporting President Nixon running almost 3-to-1 ahead of George McGovern, but our CBS News estimate in Kansas is that the president's final margin may be on the order of 69%, and we estimate that President Nixon has carried Kansas. Of course, Kansas, one of the most rock-ribbed Republican states anywhere, if not the most rock-ribbed Republican state. In the senatorial race in Kansas, a winner there, Senator James Pearson, to the surprise of no one, running very well ahead of Arch Tetzlaff, the one-time member of the German Luftwaffe, now a naturalized American citizen. Our CBS News estimate is that Senator Pearson not only has been reelected in Kansas, but he's been reelected by a margin approaching 72%, and he may be one of the few Republican senators anywhere to run ahead of President Nixon this time. In the Kansas governor's race, a race that few people thought could be close, Governor Robert Docking running well ahead with 2% of the precincts reporting in the tabulated vote. Our CBS News estimate is in the Kansas gubernatorial race that Governor Docking's final winning margin may be in the order of 62%. Now, Docking is a Democrat. This is be his fourth consecutive term. He's running against the nationwide trend, of course, but Docking is known in Kansas as a super conservative, although he is a Democrat, and our CBS News estimate is that Governor Docking has been reelected. Now, we don't have enough in the Illinois governor's race, which is expected to be one of the closest races anywhere in the country, to make a lot out of it as yet. The figures as of the moment in the Illinois governor's race, this is the one between the incumbent Republican Governor Richard Ogilvie and Daniel Walker, the Democratic challenger. It could be close. Illinois is a landslide for Nixon, and Governor Ogilvie was hoping to grab the Nixon coattails enough to beat Daniel Walker, but with 2% of the precincts in and reporting, most of these in and around Cook County, Daniel Walker out ahead of Governor Ogilvie. Our CBS News estimate in Illinois is that there's no trend as yet. So that'll be one to watch, Walter, that Illinois governor's race, because the incumbent Republican governor in Illinois could be in trouble despite the Nixon landslide if the present, well, it's too early to say a trend, but he could be in trouble there. Very quickly in Michigan, not enough of the actual vote in and tabulated to even talk about, but our CBS News estimate is that President Nixon has a significant lead in Michigan, leading by about 66%. Now, quickly jumping to Missouri, CBS News estimates that Richard Nixon has carried the state of Missouri. These are the actual figures, but the CBS News estimate is this. We estimate that President Nixon's final winning total in Missouri may be on the order of 62%. Now, what that could mean in Missouri, there is a very close, what was expected to be a very close gubernatorial race there between Christopher Kit Bond the 33-year-old Republican state auditor, and Edward Dowd, a former FBI man, the Democrat. If President Nixon's coattails hold up in Missouri, if his winning margin is on the order of 62%, that means that he probably will carry in with him in Missouri a Republican governor. Walter, if you're feeling low tonight or know anyone who is, you might tell them about 19-year-old Scott Deblow. He hitchhiked all the way from Jackson, Wyoming to Rochester, Minnesota to cast a vote in person for George McGovern when he found out it was too late to cast an absentee ballot. And I have an idea that while we can applaud young Mr. Deblow's persistence in getting his vote in, that he may feel that it's an awful long ride back to Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
He did a little better than an elderly lady up in New Hampshire who showed up at the polls to be told she was dead. They checked the registration rolls. They said, I'm sorry, you died.
Well, that's the reverse of what sometimes happens in South Texas and in Chicago, isn't it, when dead people manage to vote?
Yeah, and maybe, yes.
Walter, you may also be interested to know that John Ashbrook has been reelected in Ohio in what some thought might be a closer congressional race than that. The president's coattails appear to be holding up very well in some of those Ohio congressional races.
And 3 more states now have gone into President Nixon's column, according to our estimates here, based on the precinct, the sample precincts. They are Delaware, Oklahoma, and North Carolina. And now a 4th, North Dakota, which puts the president within a couple of electoral votes of those necessary to win. He is very close to a victory for his 2nd term, according to our CBS News estimates. CBS News coverage of Election Night 72 will continue in a moment.
You've got responsibilities. You want to invest for the future. Payne Weber knows it's tough to decide what's best. Should you buy stocks for long-term capital gains possibilities or for income? What about municipal bonds or corporate bonds or mutual funds? Get professional help with your investments. Talk to Payne Weber. After all, it's your money. You'd better know how to invest it. Payne Weber helps you know.
The solid 73 Ford Torino. Can it ride over this course of 2x4 smoothly enough to keep a tightrope walker balanced on top? High wire specialist Bill Couch is about to find out on a tightrope rigged to Torino's body. He's counting on Torino's suspension to soak up the bumps and keep them safely on that wire. Bill signals, and they're off. Those wheels are taking quite a pounding, but Bill isn't, as Torino's remarkable suspension does its job. The 1973 Ford Torino, the solid midsize that gives you confidence on the road. Incredibly smooth riding, stable, strong, and quiet. Because it's a Ford. The new 1973 Ford Torino at your Ford dealers now. Ford Torino, the solid midsize.
According to our CBS News estimate, President Nixon has been reelected. He has gone over the top with Michigan's 21 electoral votes for a total of 286. He needed 270. So President Nixon has been reelected according to our CBS News estimate. And let's go now to the Republican headquarters at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington. That's the scene at the Shoreham Hotel, the Republican National Headquarters. They don't seem to have gotten the word there yet. Maybe they weren't listening, or perhaps they already have been so assured of victory tonight that the announcement from us that our sample precincts put the president over hardly count. At any rate, that's what we say. We'll be back shortly with more results from Election Night 72, but first, the latest from our local stations on the races in your area. This is Walter Cronkite at CBS.